Okay, I'm going to try to talk about classic ski construction and cambers and some of the implications for the different models, shapes, and even the variation within models when it comes to selecting classic skis for people and when it comes to preparing them and waxing them. This is difficult. I tried to shoot this a couple of days ago and I completely failed. I can't do this. This isn't working. There's too much. Can't do it. It ended up being a situation where I kept talking in circles because the thing about classic skis is that every time you change one variable, everything else changes. It's like trying to squish a ball of mercury. It keeps kind of squirting out somewhere else. So even just describing it, as I try to describe one change, the implied changes elsewhere end up leading me off on tangents. And it's really, really difficult to present the information. You kind of need to acquire the whole picture at once and have a holistic understanding of the way the system works. I'm going to do my best to try to break things down into the main principles governing the way the pocket works. And in order to do that, we're going to leave aside a whole bunch of the stuff that I've already covered in the skate video with respect to the structure of the ski and the camber and the gliding surfaces and the length of the contact zones and everything else. Obviously, that stuff has to be taken into consideration when we're picking classic skis, but the subject of kick, getting good kick and getting a ski that kicks well and glides fast, is so profoundly important for classic skis that it does beg its own sort of dedicated video. We're going to focus on that a little bit. Personally, I have a high stake in this. I have always wanted to be a really good classic waxer. In my opinion, classic skiing is like the spiritual center of the universe. Well, that might be overstating it. We sell as many classic skis as we do skate skis, so it's a big part of our business as well. Back in 2007, we moved out to British Columbia. Amy got a job coaching at the Callahan Valley Training Center up in Whistler Olympic Park, which was the newly developed Olympic venue for the 2010 Olympics. And we moved out there and we worked there for a couple of years. And I was working daily in the at the venue, the Whistler Olympic Park venue. And I encountered conditions that were trickier than what I was accustomed to as a New England skier. And that's saying something. At the same time, that's when I started going to some World Cup competitions. I was doing some contract work with the U.S. ski team and went to World Cups. I started going to World Championships. I started seeing World Cup waxers who were really, really good. The guy I'm thinking of primarily is Joachim Augustsson. He's a Swede. He was working with the U.S. ski team. He's the best waxer I've ever seen in action. A really soft-spoken, understated guy. Guys like this, and there are a bunch of them on the World Cup, they understand the whole system. They understand skis, wax, how changing one variable affects other variables, and they know how to work with their athlete, and they understand how to apply it to the course, and they make great solutions, holistic solutions. And comparing that to the majority of waxers, even at a World Cup level, who are just copying what they see other people do, made me really want to achieve a deeper and more well-rounded understanding of classic. So I have a lot invested in this personally. I can't say I've become a really masterful classic ski guy, but I've worked hard at it, and I've had my moments where I feel like I made a difference to some racers in some races, and that's a good feeling. More to the point, I feel like as a business, we've really worked hard to give people good classic ski experiences. Classic skiing depends on a positive feedback loop. It takes a little bit of a miracle for classic to work. I mean, when you get right down to it, it's a magic trick. It shouldn't work at all. It's like a bumblebee flying. There's not enough surface area on the wings to get the thing off the ground. We're talking about skiing up hills on like 50 centimeters by 4 centimeters wide of slightly sticky wax on ice, and you're supposed to make that grip fast enough to charge up the hill with full energy and output. It's like a fantasy that could ever actually work, and yet it does. But it really depends on confidence. It depends on being relaxed and moving off of what is necessarily a pretty limited absolute amount of grip with enough poise and momentum and body awareness to make that grip work for you. if you think in terms of like absolute grip, if you were to put a bunch of sheetrock screws straight through the ski, you would have way more absolute grip, like just drive them right down into the snow, but the ski wouldn't glide. And so you would just stand still churning and it wouldn't feel like you had any grip. Grip is really a perception that comes in contrast to glide. The biggest sensation of grip comes when you have faster skis or when you just have a big difference between grip force and glide force. And so it's that kick and glide aspect of classic that's really a miracle. If it was just about getting more grip, it would be pretty easy, but it's not. So we've got a lot to try to get through here in terms of coming up with a really good classic ski solution. And it's a fun problem to work on, but it's also a challenge. Building good classic skis, I think, is very, very difficult. And man, when companies get it right, and they tend to have some good skis out there right now, it's a real work of art. Okay, so in basic terms, we want the wax to hold sort of free of the snow when we're not trying to kick, and then to compress and contact the snow when we are trying to kick. Holding it free of the snow, I think there's this fantasy out there that the wax doesn't even touch the snow. That's not really the case. The wax is more or less constantly in contact with the snow even when we're gliding. It's a question of how much pressure goes through it. We want to unpressurize the wax, hold it free, and some pocket shapes can help with this too, and we will get into that. So we want to hold clear of the snow. We want to have the wax pocket free when you're in a full weight neutral position, and that's to say you're on one ski gliding. In that position, you are full weight but neutral. You're not up on the ball of your foot. Your weight is spread out and it's diffuse and centered about 15 centimeters behind the pivot point or the balance point of the ski where the binding mount point is. So decentralized load on a flat foot, centered 15 centimeters or so behind the balance point. That should be an unloaded position for the wax pocket. The other state where skis need to be fast and free and, glide free is when we're setting up for double pull. And in that case, we're up and forward on the foot. When we get forward on the foot, something interesting happens. As the heel comes up, the load really centralizes right around that bony stuff at the back of your toes, like the metatarsal head and that whole area in there. You go from a diffuse load to a really centralized point load. And so the action on the ski is more focused, which tends to act like a higher force. So double pull setup tends to be forward, which focuses the load, but it's also half weight. So this is the other state where we need to have really free skis, half weight forward. So full weight neutral, diffuse load, back, 15 centimeters, half weight forward. That forward position tends to be 7 to 8 centimeters behind the balance point. That's gliding as well for double pulling. Tucking is kind of half weight back, and that should be just lightning fast. That's the most unloaded the ski's ever going to be, and that's really typically not a big problem. And then we need the ski to compress. We need to put pressure on the wax when you go full weight forward position. This is the trigger. This is how you kick the ski, is to move from that neutral position to a forward position. And there are lots of stylistic ways to do this. Different people either initiate the kick through a flatter foot with impulse or just through a move forward on the foot with position. This is a really important subject when it comes to identifying what kind of cambers are going to work well for different skiers. Okay, when we initiate the kick, when we move forward on the foot, when we load full weight in a kicking position, generating kick force really depends on making some imprint on the wax. Of course, the wax hardness and viscosity and everything else is tuned to the crystals. Whether it's hard wax or clister, we're picking kick wax that takes the appropriate level of imprint from the crystals. But to make this imprint, we also kind of need to make some noise. This is how I refer to it, because it's good to think about it in terms of slamming a door. If you wind up and slam a door, you can make a lot of noise. But if that door is almost all the way closed, it's harder to make a noise. And if that door is already closed, it's really hard to make noise. And this is important because if a ski is already on the ground, it's hard to make any kind of impulse through it because you can't make noise. You can't kick it like that. And even a relatively soft kick initiation wants to create a changing state under the ski in order to provide that imprint force to the wax to give you really good grip. Okay, so nothing I've said here is breaking anyone's brains. We all know that the ski needs to be fit in order to provide kick when you move up and forward, and therefore you should have the right stiffness ski and everything should be good. But it's not quite that simple, because the pocket geometry and the physical materials involved have some really profound implications. The qualities of the pocket change drastically, say with pocket shape, but even more specifically with the pocket length. I've actually mocked this up. I've got 3 different pockets here that are in different lengths. And these are actually, I took measurements. This is they're half scale. So that's a 30 centimeter piece of alloy. And this is a 25 centimeter piece of alloy. And this is a 20 centimeter piece of alloy. So this would be like having a 60 centimeter pocket. That's really long. This would be like having a 50 centimeter pocket. Pretty average, 20 behind the foot, 30 in front. Pretty average. And this would be like having a 40 centimeter pocket. That's very compact and short. I want to show you the difference between these and how that has implications for how the skis get picked, fit, and waxed. Oh, I have props. Hang on. Hold it there with me. Ta-da. Can we see this? With this. This is a scale. It's a gram scale. And I'm going to use it to measure the force that gets applied across the pocket. I have a force gauge. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to measure the load required to compress the pocket. This is a pocket. My pockets all have the same height. I've bent them really carefully. Okay, so they all basically have very similar camber height. So we're going to take this and we're going to compress them, and we're going to measure how much load it takes to compress these. All right. And at the same time, if this is the back of the ski and this is the front of the ski, we're going to measure force transmission across the pocket and try to see what happens when we close the pocket, how much force goes to the far end of the pocket, because this is something worth considering. All right. Just the load of the load cell itself puts us at 6.6 newtons, and we're getting 2.1 onto the tip of the ski. And now we are going to push down until the pocket closes. What's it say? It's like 55, 56, 57 newtons. Oops, a little further. What's it say? Well, that's like 90. And that's 22. And then I can push really, really hard and go to like 150 something, and that's only 24. Okay, so gets pretty closed at around like 80, 90, and it transmits 24 to the front. Now we're going to look at our medium bridge length. All right, here we go. We're going to compress it. All right, it's compressed. What am I at? 140, 150. Whoop. Yeah, 160 or so. And 36. And I can bury this all the way, and I can get it to transmit like 39. And it's up at 220. It's putting a lot of weight on it. Okay, so this took about 90 newtons to compress. This one was like 150, and it transmitted more to the front. Let's try the short pocket. Oh, I maxed out the scale. It's transferring so much force to the front. If I back it down. Yeah, I think it tops out at like 50 newtons or something. And we're at like 180 or 200. So this is much stiffer, and it transfers way more to the front of the pocket. Okay, let's talk about this, because this is kind of critical. The stiffness of a beam is an inverse cube relationship to its length. So as that pocket, that bridge gets longer, the stiffness response of the camber gets shorter. We need to make a clarification. Stiffness is a material property, and the material on the ski has a stiffness characteristic. The geometry of the ski, the thickness profile and everything, there's stiffness to the ski at every point along the ski, okay? These are material characteristics, and one ski to the next has the same material stiffness. That's like saying that these pieces of aluminum, which were cut from the same piece of bar stock, have the same material stiffness. It's the same material. Clear? We're good. However, the camber expression has a very different stiffness expression. So with the same amount of camber preload, these things don't rebound very well. They're not actually springs. It's just bar stock, just cheap alloy. So I got to bend them back. They compress a little. But the longer beam collapses more easily, even though materially it's the same stiffness. It also transmits less force to the bridge. And this is important because grip force depends on force transmission, not only contact. Are we clear? Okay, good. Okay, now I'm going to try a shorter pocket that's a little lower and a longer pocket that's higher. We know the material is the same stiffness, but we also know the camber expression is going to be softer on a longer pocket, and we want to look at a comparison of compressing this longer, higher pocket to compressing this shorter pocket. Let's see what happens here. All right, here we go. All right, we're like mid-30s there. And 177 there. I kind of rebent it. It was a little stiffer. But this one now is a much higher camber, and we're going to check that. And we are at low 30s, 32 and 177 or 78 or something. So once again, what we see is even though the material stiffness is the same, we can turn this long camber up and get the same expressed stiffness, but it doesn't transmit to the end of the pocket at the same level. This one was like 38, 39. This one was only like 32. So this concept of force transmission across the bridge becomes quite important. As we think about pocket shape, we need to think about how the wax experiences the force and how it turns that into grip force. It's tempting just to think about contact, and most people do think about skis kicking as a problem or an issue of just generating contact. You need to put the wax down, right? But we need to think about pressure. And one of the things that occurs with these pocket shapes is the idea that the pressure isn't only dead vertical. It can have a horizontal component, particularly when there's good force transmission to the end of the pocket. So if we take this short little pocket, and we can see to have a similar camber height to our longer pocket, it's actually kind of like, it's got to be steeper at the ends, right? It's a smaller bending radius. It has to be a smaller bending radius to have the same height. That smaller bending radius is what makes it shorter and the same height, but that bend also gives us a steeper angle at the ends, and it puts more collecting force into the ends of the pocket. And that collecting force is coupled with higher force transmission across the shorter beam section. I tend to think of this as being like, the analogy I use is raking gravel. Like if you have a gravel driveway and you're trying to rake it smooth with like a leaf rake, all right? So you've got pebbles and dirt and all this stuff, and you got this leaf rake, and it's got kind of soft tines, and then it's actually kind of worn out, soft, old handle. And if you hold it way back far away from the rake and really low to the ground, it's really hard to rake any gravel. It's hard to get any force through the tines of the rake. If you get your hands closer and lift them up, you can put much more force to the gravel with the same amount of work, and you actually move some gravel. It's kind of like that. it's really hard to generate kick force way, way far away from your foot. So as tempting as it is to think, oh, I want a really long pocket, think of all the surface area. We're putting way more wax on the snow. Frequently, the ability of the material to transmit your force to the ends of the pocket isn't that good. Furthermore, as you consider the ability to build kick force being analogous to the amount of change that occurs, a ski that's really, really soft, that bottoms out under the load at, say, like 55% of your body weight, doesn't give you a whole lot to work with, because once you have bottomed out that camber, you don't really continue to cause a state of change. You're not moving anymore. All you're doing is putting additional pressure through where your foot is, but you're not getting good transmission across the pocket, nor are you getting much more gathering force, and you're not creating any further change or escalating the absolute kick force in a really meaningful way. On the other hand, pocket that transmits force really well, contributes angularly to a gathering force, can develop higher peak force with a stiffer camber expression. So the higher force it takes to close the ski, the more you create escalating kick force as you kick deeper into it. And it's going to reward harder kicks. So think about it. How about a ski that when you kick harder, it grips more, versus a ski that gives you 100% of the available grip almost immediately as soon as you're on it, but doesn't develop increasing grip strength? It's just two really different skis, and we have to take this into consideration when we're picking the skis and helping people wax them. Okay, adjustments to cambers and material in classic skis and what they do to the pocket. Pocket length. The stiffness of a beam is in an inverse cube relationship to its length. So a long pocket has a softer camber expression. As the bridge shortens, it also stiffens. This means that a traditional camber, like leaf spring camber with a high point back, where the contact points continually come in, will get stiffer and stiffer as you go lower. Pocket height. Higher pockets retain more leverage over the ends of the pocket. It's like lifting up that rake handle to get leverage over the tines of the rake, remember? And therefore can provide more collecting force to gather the wax. Shorter pockets also provide more collecting force. Low, flat pockets have the potential to invert or collapse. Oh, this is fascinating. Did I already show this? I don't think I did. Let's say we have a really low, long pocket. This is like, oh, a lot of people just really want this ski. Like, oh man, give me a nice low, long pocket with lots of grip force, okay? And here it is. I built this low, long pocket, and it's got some height under the foot, which gives us the ability to slam that door. We need to make a little noise. But the problem is, because it's so flat, it collapses really early, and it actually contacts here before it puts any pressure out here. And this is really common with super flat pockets. When we're picking skis, we'll find premature contact in the pocket that then causes bridging, and we can't put any more force. We can't use this material any longer, and it's going to drag like crazy because it's so soft. It comes down so low so quickly. We just climb up into double pole position, and that thing's going to be dragging wax like nuts. So this is a complete reject ski if you have this kind of inverting pocket. And most of the time we spend trying to pick hard wax skis is trying to avoid these inverting pockets on really soft skis. Most of the time people bring us skis that don't kick or glide, or with a super narrow window where they're just obviously trading off kick for glide and they don't have a sweet spot. It's often super low pockets, and very frequently they have this inversion where they collapse in the middle before they close from the ends. And typically it's a bit of a deal breaker. You don't want that. Material stiffness in the bridge is really interesting, and it's tempting to think, oh, I want a soft ski, I want it supple, I want it easy to move through. You need to have the material that you can actually kick through, right? But the stiffer the material, the more your force gets transmitted to the end of the pocket, the more collecting force you get, the higher the force you get earlier in the kick, but also the harder it is to close and sort of finish the movement. but also the stiffer it is, the higher it's going to remain and the harder it is to move all the way through it. So finding that balance of material force is difficult. When the pockets are too soft, when the material in the ski is soft, there's a certain camber height below which they tend to collapse. And this is kind of a critical thing. Every ski construction has a end flex value that is a good predictor for when the ski is going to get really slow because the pocket just flattens out too much. This is what happens. You have a bunch of skis that are built of the same material. They have the same material stiffness, and they come in graduating flex values. So Fisher's FA value, for example. Let's say you take a 207 and you have a bunch of skis from 38 kilos to 40 to 42 to 44, 46, 47, whatever. The skis below about 40 kilos in 207 is really hard to make them fast, because to have that material express as soft as a 40 or 38 or something like that, it's got to be incredibly flat, and therefore it tends to drag. Okay, position of the high point. In general, with the high point further back, you can create a more balanced distribution with great force transmission, but you also have a pocket that rides really flat under load. Flat under load means the potential surface area contact is the entire wax pocket, and it's hard to keep those skis running really fast unless they're really, really high. Okay, as you move the high point forward, you get into this situation where you have residual camber. That's the camber that doesn't close all the way when you compress the ski fully under the load. And it's, in front of the foot. This residual camber thing creates a little vortex where the ski, when it's in motion, doesn't present all that much flat surface area to the snow. Typically, they don't kick badly, particularly when the snow's a little compliant or the wax is a little compliant. That ski with some residual camber in it, some shape out front, provides really good kick force. And in fact, that little bit of angular force contribution from the front can provide really good gathering force, a little better in softer snow than a flat pocket very often, and tends to hold well till the end of the kick. So that's all really a positive thing, but it's got to be managed by degrees. Residual camber can be really dangerous because you do limit the total amount of surface area contact that you're going to have in hard tracks. And so, that becomes something to manage and work with. But that's all down to the position of the high point and how high it is above that finishing height under the load, and where it's positioned, which is usually going to be about midpoint of the residual camber. So if you have a residual camber that's like 0.3 of a millimeter above the camber under the load and positioned 10 centimeters in front of the balance point, then you're going to have about 20 centimeters of opening in front of the ski. Okay, pocket shape in general. Long tapered pockets at the ends tend to create a smoother camber release between the glide surfaces and the kick pocket, and this helps the glide speed, but less carrying capacity for wax at the extremities. So you have to be really careful about the thickness of the wax at the ends of the pocket because they set up drag much earlier. Abrupt transitions that are like really vertical transitions can create more gathering force and a shorter, more contained pocket with higher carrying capacity, but they imply a change in shape from the glide surfaces that sometimes isn't optimal for creating really good glide. They sometimes just glide slower. So for instance, trying to find really good clister skis for Chris Freeman that could carry great double pole speed, we needed to go for a longer pocket in order to reduce those angles. And that worked great, but the really compact clister skis were great for striding, but not as good for double poling. This interplay of the materials and in the pocket and the shape in the pocket with the materials outside of the pocket is pretty interesting because you can't avoid it. The pocket is connected to the other parts of the ski. And so in general, skis with long contact zones in the glide area tend to have positive camber. We talked about this in the skate video, and you can go back and refer to that if you need to. But those long contact zones tend to accompany higher resting cambers and more material deformation outside the pocket, and those skis often carry higher proportion of the load outside the pocket. And what this can mean is that as you move from vertical past the contact point, your force is no longer pointing 100% down. It's on a vector like this, and the horizontal component of that vector escalates at the same time that the vertical component goes down. That means your kick force, your vertical kick force, actually decreases as you move past the kicking foot. Makes sense, right? It's just vectors. If the ski is really competing with your vertical force, if the material outside the pocket is trying to lift the whole pocket at a high enough rate, you can start to lose the kick in the tail end of the movement simply because you have that high camber. These higher camber skis can be awesome on the right skier, waxed the right way on the right day, but they tend to imply a more compact kick that's more front-loaded with a quick and early release. People who tend to elongate the kick and try to stretch it out as they get a little tired and maybe kick with a little less precision can often really struggle on super high resting camber skis for this reason. So the alternative to these high resting cambers with positive camber in the glide surfaces is what I call a rolling camber in the glide surface, where you get a little camber return, some built-in tip and tail splay that would be characteristic of, say, a Fisher 902 ski. Because the tip and tail comes up, these skis tend to sit lower. And since you roll through that camber, the material outside the pocket tends to relax as you compress past it, and it tends to gather the carrying strength of the ski in the pocket, and more of that load is carried inside the pocket. And this tends to make the pocket a little stiffer at the end, but also more predictable. So once you're into the kick, it tends to last with you to the end of the kicking motion. Once you get the wax dialed in testing, it tends to last for the race and be predictable. And because you're rolling into the pocket, it's kind of like instead of stepping onto a trampoline, it's like going on a trail run and coming with a log across the trail and putting your foot right on the backside, and you kind of just roll into the pocket, and the kick just feels like you arrive in it. It can feel really on-off, and it's a great feeling just for getting into the kick. You kind of, the ski holds, and then as you roll into it, it just collapses quickly and delivers the kick in a really satisfying way. Man, we've talked about so much here, and I haven't even covered how to use these lessons about pockets and talk about kick. Definitely, as we're working with the skis, a ski with really low long pocket is going to have low absolute force transmission, low amounts of total action or noise. It's not a ski that you really can kick hard. For that reason, we tend to wax them with very soft, tacky waxes. The wax that's going to work best on a ski like that needs to have sort of contact adhesion. We want what I call flypaper kick, something that's got a really high tack where the grip force spikes really quickly on contact with relatively light pressure. So soft skis, long pockets, skis that are low underfoot but have residual camber can carry even softer waxes or tacky clisters. And these can work really well as long as you're waxing to the soft end of the range and are keeping the wax thin. Soft, thin wax. Tackiness, not strength in the wax pocket. Pockets with higher peak force. These are typically higher pockets, stiffer material, or more compact pockets, which make the camber expression a little stiffer but provide more force transmission to the ends of the pocket, tend to carry deeper wax jobs, and because the absolute force delivered to the wax is higher, that wax can often be harder than the wax that was used on a lower ski. Typically, soft wax is very fast, but prone to icing. It can be dangerous, okay? But in absolute terms, it can be really, really fast. Stiffer waxes are safe. They're not going to ice, but they're often not that fast when they're in contact with the snow. This is a little counterintuitive. We tend to think of working up the wax line and your greens and blues are fast on a given day, and then you get into the violets and they get really grippy, but they slow down. And of course, we've all experienced this. But in any given temperature range, often we can find a soft wax that's really, really fast. I believe that the compliance of the wax and its relationship with the snow, because it's always kind of touching the snow one way or another, it makes it faster in some way, whereas a really stiff wax, a hard one, can be like dropping a brick in the snow. It's just too stiff and it plows the snow, and it's just not compliant enough for the snow conditions, and it tends to drag. It tends to just be slow, even though it's very safe and it's not going to ice. So as we're working with waxes, sometimes there's a really good reason to use a low ski that can carry a really thin layer of tacky wax. The other thing about these high skis, if we use a high ski with a lot of force transmission and a lot of kick force contribution, and we use that with a really soft tacky wax, it becomes incredibly icing prone, much more prone to picking up ice than the low ski, and that's because the embedding force from all that force transmission across the pocket and the collecting force and the sheer amount of noise that the ski makes, it tends to bed ice in, and it can be much more dangerous. So on days when there's a high icing liability with the wax that's going to kick, often a lower ski is a much, much better solution. And this is why sometimes in wet conditions that low ski with a residual camber is really good. However, that same ski, when you need a strong wax job, something to bed crystals into, or just a good cold hard wax ski for hard tracks where you want a wax that you can, really bed against a hard track, that really low ski might just not deliver enough absolute force, doesn't have enough surface area contact, and you end up trying to kick a tacky wax in conditions where a tacky wax isn't the solution that you want. Okay, I've gone on way too long, and there's so much I haven't covered about classic skis. As I said, it's just a really complex subject. It's a fascinating subject, and it's like my favorite subject in skiing. It's super fun. When we talk about skate skis, a huge amount of what we're selecting is baked into the ski. It's just built into it. And so we're picking models, and then we're selecting cambers for specific conditions and maybe some dynamic properties, but mostly a lot of that is built into the ski from the outset. With classic, certainly that exists as well. Baked-in qualities are a big part of it. The Matsu skis are wildly different from the Fischer skis, and the Salomon skis are a different beast altogether, and those define the working parameters. But when we're picking classic skis, we're doing much more active selection of cambers, camber characteristics, targeted force transmission for a specific skier. Some skiers tend to load really actively through the front of their foot with a relatively light but quick kick motion, a decisive move from a neutral to a forward foot position. Other skiers tend to wail on the ski from a flat foot position. When you grew up, how you learned to ski, who your models were, and how actively you developed your technique over time are all contributing factors, and we have really developed a bit of an art of trying to figure out what motion patterns people use in their striding based on what other sports they do and what their experience on skis is, and what kind of wax jobs give them the best success, and what their background in the sport is when they came up as skiers. All of these things can help to build a picture for us, but it's a very, very personal thing. Selecting skate skis, it's kind of a no-miss proposition. The companies all make great skate skis. We typically see the turnover in race fleets and skate skis be very, very high. But classic skis, because of that wax camber, because of the need for the skis to show up on the day with a unified holistic solution, the right ski, the right wax for the skier on the day for the course. These things all need to come into play. And most of the time, if I'm waxing a couple pairs for one racer, they're going to have quite different wax jobs, maybe even different wax altogether on the skis based on the camber and how we expect that camber to deliver grip force and release and where the speed is going to come from. So picking skis for people is it requires a lot of understanding a ski with a super short pocket and a ski with a super long pocket necessarily are going to have very different flex values. The flex value is such a tiny, tiny part of this whole thing. I mean, this ski's going to be softer materially, but it's got to carry higher, and a soft ski with a really high camber might be harder to kick than a stiff short pocket ski with a moderate camber. The way the ski is going to respond depends more on the shape than on that flex value. And so we're trying to take all of this into consideration, and it's a great challenge, and we're not infallible, but we tend to do pretty well as long as we keep up with the material changes in the skis over time, and we really understand how they work. But this is why it's a lot of work to keep up.